Hello, this is Professor Brown-Sederberg, and I thought we'd demonstrate how to write a simple program that does some arithmetic calculations. And specifically, we're going to do Chapter 2, Programming Project Number 1 of our textbook. So we know, here we're using Dr. Java, that we will establish the bounds of our program by declaring that we will have a public class. And we're going to name our class C2PP1. That's our convention in this course. And we're going to bound our class here and here with these curly brackets. And I'll put a comment in here, a single line comment, to note that this is the end of the class. And so I've established my class or my program. Now, certainly, I want to establish my main method. And my main method is what runs when I run the program. And we know that the main method is public static void main, and then in parentheses string, and remember that's a capital S, open and close square brackets, and then args. This is the line declaring our main method. We'll bound our main method here, and again I'll use a single line comment to note the end of main. Now, I don't have to put those comments in. I just do it for me so I can keep track of my curly brackets. We'll see later on as we start to do more sophisticated programs that you can lose the order of your curly brackets, and that can lead to problems. So I do suggest that you put in comments. Now, what we're going to do in this program is ask the user for three numbers, three ints, whole numbers, and then we're going to find the average of those three numbers. Now, we know that if we are to get anything in from the user, we must have this line outside the declaration of our class, and it is import java.util.scanner. And what that does is it brings in the library util, specifically the class scanner. The class scanner has methods that we can use to get information from the user through the keyboard. But in order to do that, what we have to have is an instance of that class scanner, and we'll declare that here inside main, and we'll name it keyboard. And we do that by convention because what we're going to do as we actually create this instance, and we do that with the keyword new, we're going to create an instance of the class scanner, associating with it, with what's passed in here, an argument to the constructor. That's something we'll look at later on. But what we're going to do is we're going to pass in system.in. And what that does is it physically associates the keyboard with the variable name keyboard. So when I refer to keyboard, I'm referring to the physical keyboard. Now, that's an instance of the class scanner. It's a variable for us. What we're going to do now is have some other variables. Now we know that we want to get three numbers in from the user, so we will declare them to be of type int. Our problem set says that they must be whole numbers. I'm going to declare them n1, n2, and n3. I don't give them values at this point because I know I'm going to get that in from the user. And you'll see that I've declared three different ints on one line. I can do that. All of these variables are of the same type, so I can have them all declared on the same line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare another variable. I'm going to declare it to be of type double, and I'm going to call it average. Now we know that given three ints, three whole numbers, if I find their average, I could very well have a number that has a decimal value. I can't put into an int space a decimal value, a number with a decimal value. I can only do that into something that's a floating point type, and that's a double. A double is one of those floating point numbers. So we'll have average is our variable to hold the average. Now what we want to do is ask the user for the input, and so we'll do so nicely with system.out.println, and we know that that prints whatever I pass to it to the screen, and so I'll ask, please enter an int. And the user will give that to me through the keyboard, and I'll grab it using a method from the class scanner, calling that method using keyboard. So I'll put into n1 what is returned to me when I have keyboard, call the method nextInt, which is the specific method to grab an int as entered by a user. All right. Now, nextInt returns back what it grabs, and we'll save that into the space n1 through the assignment operator. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit and copy this and paste it 2 times. And we'll see that I will ask for a second number, put it into N2, a third number, and put it into N3. And so now I can calculate the average. And I know that what I want to do is add N1, N2, and N3, divide by the number of numbers, that's 3, and put it into the space average. Now, to add N1 and N2 and N3, I simply write that. And I want to have it correct as I have there. Now, I'll divide that by 3 and put that into average. But as I look at this formula, I know that I have an error. My intent is to have N1, N2, and N3 added and then divide that sum by 3, returning that value and storing it into average. But I know by my order of precedence and associativity that what's going to happen here is I'll divide N3 by 3 and then add that to N2 and N1. So I want to be explicit here and put parentheses around my N1, N2, N3, and then have that sum divided by 3. But I know further that I'll have an error here because I will be dividing an int, N1 plus N2 plus N3, by another int. And I know that by the rule of integer division, I will have returned back to me a truncated value. So if I were to enter for N1, N2, and N3 the numbers 3, 4, and 3, what would be returned back by this is the value 3 with no decimal value. And I know that 3 plus 4 plus 3 divided by 3 should give me back 3.33. Now, my solution to this, I have a number of ways to solve this. What I could do is add 0.0 to this 3, thus making it a double. I therefore would have not integer division, but an integer divided by a double. That, by definition, will return back a double. It'll be stored back into this average space. Want to note that you can put into a double space an int because the int is of lesser sophistication than a double. Remember to watch that video about the food chain and integer division. All right? Those two videos that I've posted for you. So this would solve the problem. I could then, system.out.println, just print out the value of average. So let's see if this will compile. We'll save it. And we'll now run it. And we see that it asks me to enter an int, and I'll enter in 3, and then 4, and then 3. And indeed, I have the correct answer. Now, had I not made this 0.0, I would have gotten an incorrect answer. As I run my program now, and I enter in 3, and 4, and 3, you'll see that I got the 3 back. So one solution to our integer division is to add 0.0 to the whole number, the int by which I'm dividing. Or what I could have done is I could have cast the value N1 plus N2 plus N3 into a double. And to cast a number, I simply put into parentheses what I want it to pretend to be. So with this addition of parentheses, double, close parentheses, in front of, that is right adjacent to, the sum N1, N2, N3, I am telling this sum to pretend to be a double. Tell me what you'd be if you were a double. And then I'm dividing that by 3. That will give me back a number with a decimal value. So we'll recompile this. And remember, I don't have that 0.0 there for the 3. And now I run it. And as I enter in 3 and 4 and 3, I have the decimal value. Now, one thing I want you to be aware of, what you don't want to do is say to this formula that I want to have the result of the whole calculation to pretend to be a double. So if I were to add a parenthesis here and a parenthesis there, I would be saying I want the result of this calculation to pretend to be a double. So the calculation is done, and then that returned value is cast into a double. Now watch when we compile and then run this, we'll see that as I enter in 3 and then 4 and then 3, I get 3.0, not 3.33. And that's because this calculation is done and the truncation takes place. So when I say I want the result of this to be cast into a double, all that happens is a 0.0 is added to it, because what's been returned here is an int, and an int cast into a double just has added to it 0.0. So we will not cast the entire, we will cast just the result of this calculation, n1 plus n2 plus n3. Now I also could have just had one of these elements pretend to be a double. So I could have done this. I could have said to n2, I want you to pretend to be a double. And so what we'd be adding would be n1, n2 is a double, and n3, thus making this a double. We then divide by an int, we'd have a double returned. So let's compile that and run it. And we'll enter in a 3 and a 4 and a 3, and we get the correct answer. Now, this seems like a very simple problem. Take 3 numbers in, add them up, and divide them, get the average. But you'll see that there are a number of things that we have to consider. We, of course, have the mechanics of creating our instance of the class scanner so that we can get something in through the keyboard. We have our variables that we have declared for the numbers entered by the user and for the average. And then we have this output to the user asking them for values to be entered. We grab those values, store them into the spaces, and then we do our calculation, printing out the result. So there are a number of points here to this very simple problem, but these will become clearer and clearer and clearer as we go through the semester. Thank you very much.